Tiffany, a bright and ambitious 10-year-old with dreams of making a difference, is brutally bullied at school by a vicious group led by Becky. Their relentless taunts and cruelty chip away at Tiffany's spirit, leaving her feeling isolated and broken. Each day is a battle as she endures emotional and physical abuse. Will Tiffany find the strength to survive this nightmare? Please subscribe and stay tuned to witness her journey. "You're such a nerd, Tiffany," sneered Becky, her eyes narrowing as she whispered just loud enough for the surrounding kids to hear. Tiffany, a bright-eyed 10-year-old with a love for science and math, felt the heat rise to her cheeks as she clutched her textbook closer. The bell had just rung, signaling the end of another school day, but the lessons she'd learned in the classroom were dwarfed by the cruel ones she faced outside of it. For days, Tiffany had endured relentless torment from a group of girls led by Becky. Despite the escalating bullying, she kept the severity of her situation to herself, fearing that involving her parents would only make matters worse. The Bullies, a tight-knit pack of 7, operated like a well-coordinated unit, with Becky reigning as the undisputed leader. They navigated the school halls with a sense of purpose, each girl playing her part in the harassment. Some would whisper cruel insults, while others would snatch Tiffany's lunch or deliberately knock her books to the floor. It was a ruthless system of cruelty, and Tiffany felt trapped in a never-ending cycle, unsure of how to break free from their relentless grip. Tiffany's heart raced as she walked down the crowded hallway, her eyes fixed on the floor. The bell had just rung, signaling the end of another long school day, but for her, it was just the beginning of another round of torment. "You're such a nerd, Tiffany," sneered Becky, her voice dripping with disdain. The other girls snickered, their laughter echoing like a chorus of cruelty. Tiffany felt the heat rise to her cheeks, her grip tightening around her science textbook. "Why don't you just go home and study, loser?" one of Becky's friends chimed in, flicking her hair back with a smirk. Tiffany tried to ignore them, but the words stung like 1,000 tiny needles. She quickened her pace, hoping to escape their taunts, but they followed her, a relentless pack of wolves. In the beginning, the bullying had been subtle, just a few snickers here and there, a shoulder bump as Tiffany passed by in the hall. She tried to brush it off, convincing herself that it was just typical middle school behavior. But as the weeks turned into months, the taunts grew bolder and more aggressive. One particularly painful day, Tiffany sat alone at lunch, her heart heavy as she unwrapped her sandwich. She took a deep breath, hoping for a moment of peace, but it was short-lived. Suddenly, Becky appeared, flanked by her loyal followers, a wicked grin plastered across her face. "Hey, look at this!" Becky exclaimed, reaching out and snatching the sandwich right out of Tiffany's hands. "What's the matter, Tiffany? Too busy studying to eat?" Tiffany's eyes widened in shock as she watched her lunch fly through the air, landing with a thud on the ground. The other girls erupted in laughter, their cruel giggles echoing in her ears. "Oops. Guess it's trash now," one of them chimed in, and the laughter grew louder. Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. Tiffany felt the tears welling up in her eyes, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over their mocking voices. "Because it's fun to see you squirm." Becky shot back, her tone dripping with disdain. "You're such an easy target." As the laughter continued, Tiffany could hear their mocking voices in her head, drowning out the sound of her own thoughts. She felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare that seemed to have no end. "Why don't you just tell a teacher?" her friend Sarah had suggested once, concern etched on her face. But Tiffany shook her head, fear gripping her heart. "They won't do anything," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. And she was right. When she had mustered the courage to report the incidents to Mrs. Smith, her teacher had simply patted her on the back and said, "Kids will be kids, Tiffany. Just try to ignore them." The dismissive response only emboldened Becky and her crew. They began to corner Tiffany in the hallways, whispering insults and shoving her books to the floor. "Oops. Did I do that?" Becky would say with a fake innocence, her eyes glinting with malice. Each incident chipped away at Tiffany's spirit, leaving her feeling more isolated and defeated. One afternoon, as Tiffany approached her locker, she froze in horror. The door was plastered with graffiti, racial slurs scrawled in bold, ugly letters. The sight made her knees buckle, and she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Look at the nerd. Can't even handle a little art," Becky taunted, her voice cutting through Tiffany's despair like a knife. The laughter of the other girls rang in her ears, drowning out her thoughts. In that moment, Tiffany felt utterly alone, the weight of their hate crashing down on her. The next day, as Tiffany navigated the bustling schoolyard, she clutched her books tightly against her chest. She attempted to concentrate on the cheerful chatter of her friends, but her heart raced when she caught sight of Becky and her group laughing together. The sound of their laughter sent a wave of anxiety through her, making it hard to breathe. "Look who it is," Becky sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tiffany, the bookworm. What's the latest in your little fantasy world?" The girls erupted in laughter, and Tiffany's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She quickened her pace, desperately trying to ignore their taunts. The next day, as Tiffany sat alone at lunch, she hoped for a moment of peace. But Becky had other plans. Approaching with a smirk, she said, "Hey, Tiff. Mind if I borrow your seat?" Before Tiffany could respond, Becky shoved her aside, causing her to stumble. "Oops. My bad," she giggled, while her friends cheered her on, their laughter ringing in Tiffany's ears. Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. "Why do you always have to be so mean?" Tiffany muttered, her voice barely above a whisper as she tried to hold back tears. "Mean? I'm just having fun," Becky replied, rolling her eyes dismissively. "Lighten up." Her parents had noticed her withdrawal, but they were blissfully unaware of the extent of the bullying. They had hoped it was just a phase, a typical part of growing up. But when they found her one night, crying in her room, surrounded by torn pages of her favorite book, they knew something was gravely wrong. "Tiffany, what's happening?" her father asked, his voice filled with concern as he knelt beside her. With trembling lips, she finally found the courage to tell them the truth. "It's Becky and her friends. They won't leave me alone. They call me names and they hurt me," she sobbed, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. Her mother's face turned pale, a mix of horror and anger washing over her. "We'll take care of this," her father said, his voice steady but filled with determination. But Tiffany knew better. She had seen how the teachers looked away, how the principal shrugged off her complaints as mere girl drama. The school had failed her, and she couldn't bear the thought of walking those halls another day. Tiffany's parents sat anxiously in the principal's office, their hearts heavy with concern. "We need to talk about the bullying Tiffany has been facing," her father began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The principal leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "I understand your concerns, but bullying is a complex issue," he replied dismissively. "I can't take any action against the girls without clear evidence." Tiffany's mother frowned, frustration bubbling to the surface. "But there are witnesses. Our daughter is suffering, and you're telling us there's nothing you can do?" "I'm afraid it's not that simple," the principal said, shrugging. "We need to approach this delicately." Tiffany's father shook his head, disappointment etched across his face. "This isn't just a minor issue. If this continues, we will have no choice but to remove Tiffany from this school." As they left the office, Tiffany's mother sighed heavily. "I can't believe he won't help us. We have to keep fighting for you, sweetheart." Tiffany nodded, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "I just want it to stop." The final straw came one fateful evening after school when Becky and her gang lured Tiffany to the secluded field behind the school. "We just want to talk, Tiffany," Becky said, her tone deceptively sweet. Tiffany hesitated but followed them, her heart pounding in her chest. As they reached the clearing, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by an eerie silence. "What do you want?" Tiffany asked, her voice shaky. Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. Becky stepped closer, a cruel smile spreading across her face. We just want you to know your place, she sneered. The other girls surrounded Tiffany, closing in like a pack of wolves. Yeah, you think you're so smart, don't you? One of them spat, shoving Tiffany hard. She stumbled back, her heart racing as she tried to steady herself. Leave me alone, Tiffany shouted, desperation creeping into her voice. But the bullies only laughed. Make us, Becky taunted, and with a swift motion, she pushed Tiffany to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and before she could react, the girls were on her, kicking and shoving her mercilessly. Look at the nerd, all alone, one girl shouted, while another pulled her hair, yanking her head back. Tiffany felt tears streaming down her face as she tried to shield herself from the blows. Stop. Please, she cried, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The laughter echoed around her, a haunting reminder of her isolation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the girls stepped back, panting and smirking at their handiwork. Tiffany lay on the ground, bruised and broken, her spirit shattered. As they walked away, Becky turned back, her voice dripping with contempt. See you around, nerd, she called, her laughter ringing in Tiffany's ears. In that moment, Tiffany knew she couldn't take it anymore. The dreams of becoming a doctor faded away, overshadowed by the fear and despair that had consumed her school life. Tiffany's parents would soon learn the truth, but in that secluded field, she felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Tiffany stumbled through the front door, her heart heavy and her body aching. The moment her parents saw her, their expressions shifted from casual curiosity to shock. Her father dropped his briefcase, rushing to her side, while her mother's eyes widened in horror. Tiffany. What happened? Her father exclaimed, kneeling down to her level. Tears streamed down Tiffany's face, and she couldn't hold back the sobs any longer. They hurt me, she managed to choke out, her voice trembling as she pointed to the bruises forming on her arms and legs. Her mother wrapped her arms around Tiffany, pulling her close. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. We're going to fix this, she whispered, her voice filled with concern. Tiffany felt the warmth of her mother's embrace, but it did little to ease the pain that had settled deep within her. After a few moments, her father stood up, determination etched on his face. We're going to the school right now, he said firmly. This has gone too far. The next day, Tiffany's parents marched into the school, their hearts pounding with a mix of anger and fear. They requested to speak with the principal, Mr. Thompson, who greeted them with a polite smile that quickly faded when he saw the seriousness of their expressions. Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. Tiffany has been bullied, and we need to talk about what happened, her father said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Mr. Thompson nodded, his demeanor shifting to one of concern. I'm sorry to hear that. We take these matters seriously, but I assure you, we will investigate the situation. But she's been hurt, her mother interjected, her voice rising in frustration. You need to do more than just investigate. This has been going on for months. I understand your concerns, Mr. Thompson replied, his tone dismissive. But bullying is a complex issue, and we can't just take action without proper evidence. We'll look into it, but I can't promise immediate results. Tiffany's heart sank. She had hoped for more, but the principal's words felt like a slap in the face. Nothing much can be done, she thought bitterly. That evening, Tiffany sat in her room, feeling more isolated than ever. Her parents exchanged worried glances, and after a long discussion, they decided to take matters into their own hands. We're going to involve the police, her father said, his voice resolute. You shouldn't have to return to that school, Tiffany. The following day, the police arrived at their home, ready to take Tiffany's statement. She recounted the events of the previous day, her voice shaking but steady. The officers listened intently, taking notes as she described the bullying, the beatdown, and the emotional toll it had taken on her. We'll launch an investigation, one of the officers assured her. We'll need to speak with the girls involved. As the investigation unfolded, the police interrogated the pack of girls. When confronted, they quickly turned on Becky, blaming her for the bullying. "She made us do it," one girl said, her voice trembling. "We didn't want to hurt her. We were just following Becky." The police took their statements seriously, and soon, the school's administration was called in for questioning. Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Smith faced scrutiny for their lack of action and failure to protect Tiffany. Days later, the school board announced that both the principal and Mrs. Smith were charged for abetting bullying. The news spread through the school like wildfire, and Tiffany felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would change. As the investigation continued, the pack of girls faced consequences for their actions. The school implemented disciplinary measures, including counseling and interventions aimed at correcting their behavior. Their parents were notified, and the girls were forced to confront the impact of their actions. Tiffany watched from the sidelines, still feeling the weight of her experiences. She knew that justice was being served, but it didn't erase the pain she had endured. Finally, after much deliberation, Tiffany's parents made the decision to transfer her to a different school. "You deserve a fresh start, away from all of this," her mother said, her eyes filled with love and determination. On her first day at the new school, Tiffany felt a mix of anxiety and hope. As she walked through the halls, she noticed the vibrant atmosphere, filled with laughter and kindness. It was a stark contrast to the darkness she had left behind. As she settled into her new classes, Tiffany began to find her footing again. She made new friends who shared her love for science and math, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging. Though the scars of her past remained, Tiffany was determined to rise above the bullying. With the support of her family and her new friends, she began to rebuild her dreams, one step at a time. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to help our channel grow.